I want to walk you through that button object that we've been working with, the one that was defined in the button lessons on Khan Academy. We start out by making a constructor function. And a constructor function is like any other function. We start with var. We are going to name our constructors with a capital letter, so we'll call it a button. And it's going to be a function. And rather than list all of the different parameters that our button is going to receive when we make a construction, what we're going to do is send it an object called a config. And the config will contain any of the parameters that we need. And you know, when we make a function, with the var statement, we have to end it with a semicolon at the end of the curly brace. So what we'll do then is any of the parameters that we want our object to have, we'll say this dot x, for example, which will be the x coordinate, and our config will have a dot x in the object. If it doesn't, we are going to default to a 0. That's what those pipes mean. We're either going to have it equal config.x or 0. We'll play the same trick with this dot y. We're either going to use the config.y, y, or, I spelled config wrong, or double pipe will start out at 0. So if there are no parameters set, our button is going to start out at the origin here in the upper left corner. This dot width, which will be the width of the button, is going to be config.width. Or we'll make the width 150. If it's not sent a width, we'll make the width 150. This dot height will be config.height or 50. And we'll have a label, which will be the text that shows up on the button. It'll either be config.label or the default will be click. Our button will have a color, which will be config.color, or we'll start out with green. Color, let's start out with some kind of green here. Let me just select some kind of green. I'm just choosing green because I like green. So we'll start out with that as the default if we're not given a color. And then finally, our buttons have an onClick function. And so we'll either receive that onClick function in the config, or we'll define an empty function. Okay. So these pipes are just the defaults if we don't receive the information. Now later when we're designing our buttons for different programs, if we want to add other attributes, we could just hit enter and continue to add those with a this dot and take them right out of the config. That's the beauty of this structure. Sending the object config, which has all these attributes in it, saves us the hassle of typing in another attribute. You're better off having 1, 2, or 3 attributes in your functions as opposed to 8, 9, 10. Okay, so that's our constructor function. Now we had a couple of prototype functions, so they're methods, we call those. So button.prototype.draw, and this puts the button on the screen. Oh man, there it goes. So button.prototype.draw. The first thing we did is we turn on the fill, and we want that to be whatever this dot color is. So our button has a color, we're going to fill with that color. Of course I got to spell it right. We're going to draw a rectangular type button, so it will be located at this dot x, this dot y for the upper corner. The width is this dot width. The height is this dot height. And we're going to have slightly rounded corners. I spelled height completely wrong. We're going to have slightly rounded corners, so we'll use 5 for that attribute. Okay. Now we're going to turn on a black fill. And this will be the fill color for our text. We're going to set the text size at 19 for now. Again, we could add these attributes up in our constructor if we wanted to have that much detail. But for now, we're just going to have a standard black 19 font. We're also going to align the text here like we did before. And we use the constants left and top. And then finally, we're going to draw the text. The text is just whatever the label is. I guess you can see how great my typing is tonight. We're going to slightly offset the text from the edge of the button. So we'll add 10 to the starting x coordinate, and we'll add half of the height. Excuse me, a quarter of the height for our offset. I wrote test size. Oh, nose is giving me the business there. It took me a while to pay attention to that. Okay, so this is our draw function, all right, and I just wanted you to hear, rather than read, exactly what each of those pieces was for. All right, we set the color of the fill, we draw the rectangle, then we set the color of the text and the size and the alignment, and we draw the text, and that puts the button on the screen. Now we had two other prototype functions. We had the is inside mouse. Is mouse inside? Oh goodness. And this function simply returns whether or not the mouse is over our button, is inside the area of our button. And basically it returns either true or false. It returns the answer to the following expression. We check mouse x, and mouse x will have to be greater than this dot x, and so double ampersand. When you're using a sentence with double ampersand, you can use return and then text it over. We'll check mouse x, and we want to be less than this dot x plus this dot width. That's the right hand side of the button. And we've been placing that in parentheses, and we're spelling width correctly, I hope. Okay, we've been placing that in parentheses to show that's one answer, one value. We'll do the same thing with mouse y. We want to be greater than this dot y, and finally we want to be less than this dot y plus this dot height. And the reason that is that's the bottom edge of the button. So if all those are true, it's going to return true. If any one of those is false, it's going to return false. That's how the logic on that works. And we'll close off that prototype function, so the oh-no's guy will go away. Okay, the last thing we had was an event handler. Oh, goodness. Too many T's, too many O's, everything. Handle mouse click. Again, this is a method. It tells us what to do if the mouse happens to get clicked for this particular button. Oh goodness. Alright, we got a happy face again. Oops, now we got a sad face. Alright. I put two of them. That was okay. Here we go. Okay, if we are inside the mouse, excuse me, if the mouse is inside the button, then we'll call the onClick function. Otherwise, we will end this method. So if handle mouse click gets called and we are inside our button, then we will call onClick. Otherwise, we won't mess with it. So this is just the definition of the object. The constructor function receives the initial configuration information and it sets up the button. If you want to draw the button, you have to call the draw method. And then we use isMouse inside and handle mouse click to deal with whether or not the button has been pressed and the mouse is inside the button. If you want a button to show up on the screen, you have to create an instance of a button object. So you make a new variable. We've been calling it button1, and we've been saying that that's a new button. So we call the constructor function, and we have to ascend it a config object. A config object is really just what we sometimes call a dictionary, right? It's a key value pair structure that JavaScript has. So that function we're going to call, and we're going to send it one of these objects, and they're just contained in curly braces. So we can then send a bunch of attributes. Like if we want the x-coordinate to be at 150, we x colon 150, we separate these things by commas. So then we'll do y colon, let's set that at 200. Let's set the width at something crazy, like I don't want to use 150, let's use 100, and the height we'll make 40 instead of 50. You can keep typing here. The label will make hello, and the color, we'll do the color function, and let's make this something interesting. We'll make it some shade of blue here. We'll make it this kind of blue right there, purple blue. And then what else do we need? We got the color, we got the label. Let's give it an onClick function, and we'll for now change the background. So onClick. OnClick is a function, function, and that function will simply change the background to gray. All right. That function's done. We are done with the object, and we're done with the function call, that constructor call. So there's button. Still don't see button on the screen, but I definitely have an error here. What did they think we were going to do? Oh, this is supposed to be a comma, not a semicolon. Okay, so now we've got everything in place here. And yeah, the deal with these objects is that they're contained in, let me just separate this out for a minute. They are contained in curly brackets. Let me just type this out so it's easier for you to see. They're contained in curly brackets, and everything is separated by a comma. So all these attributes are comma separated. You don't put a comma after the last one because it's closed off by the other curly bracket. So this is really how that looks. Oops. And then this is just ending the button call. All right. So here's our attributes listed out. They're separated, or contained, I should say, in the curly braces. They're separated by commas. Notice there still is not a button on the screen. So we've created a new button, but in order to get it to show up, we got to do button.draw. And we call button.draw, and it shows up. Did I have a typo on my height? What happened here? What happens if I make this a little bigger? Let's make it 70. Okay, I've done something crazy here. There's my thing I'm saving just to see what's going on here. Okay, why is the button funky? It's going to restart on me again. Funky button. What do you know? Where's my draw function? Did I spell height wrong somewhere? Well, this is embarrassing in the middle of a video. I don't understand why it's not getting wider. I may have to pause my video. Hang on.